everybody, John Huber here from the Maryland Education Network. As I mentioned in my other videos, the whole idea of emotionally disturbed disability is kind of its own unique topic. So I'm going to just try and get through that a little bit. And the reason, very simply, is because students who are emotionally disturbed can be very challenging, to say the least, to manage in terms of their behaviors. And in often cases, it's very disruptive to the other students and to the school and to education in general. So it kind of have its own unique thing. So, and to a certain extent, 08, ADHD under other health impaired can sometimes create similar types of situations. So those two codes we're talking about specifically right now. Primarily 06, but sometimes the ADHD thing can creep in here as well. So let's talk about this very briefly, and I'll try and go just a couple minutes and be done. IDEA says that emotionally disturbed students are entitled to qualify under special education, no question. And they give a description, or they give a definition of emotionally disturbed students that is kind of broad, and it lists some general behaviors like the very first one is like the inability to learn, or the inability to learn which cannot be explained for any other reason. I can't remember the exact word. Don't quote me on it, but it's very broad. And there's one that says like abnormal behaviors or something of that sort. So it is a very, very broad definition that I don't say any, but most school psychologists could probably create a case and say that this student is emotionally disturbed. That's not how it started, but that's where it's kind of grown to. So anyway, when a student exhibits these behaviors, in a quick history lesson, if you will, in terms of special ed, in years past, schools used to identify students all the time as emotionally disturbed, because then they would put them in these, they would assign them to these regional or cluster programs, and the bus would come pick them up and they'd send them somewhere else. They wouldn't have to deal with them. Very simple. So they were coding them like crazy. Oh, he's emotionally disturbed. He needs to go to the behavior program, etc. Then they started changing, started putting the behavior programs in the schools. In the actual, they would create a separate wing where this would be the blue wing, or the red birds wing, or in some cases they'd say it's they call them the I-5 program, or there's a variety of terms and whatnot for them. But then they would start putting them in the schools. And then even beyond that, there was a high amount of pressure to include them when inclusion really came along in the early 90s. So then schools became very reluctant to issue the code of emotionally disturbed, and the reason is because any student in special education, whatever their disability is, are entitled to certain protections. Their school is very limited on how they can discipline them. And you hear that all the time. You hear people say, wow, there's nothing they can do because he's special education. It's not exactly true, but there's some truth to that. I won't say they can't do anything, but they're limited. Schools are limited in the number of days they can suspend those students. They are limited in how often they can be removed for disciplinary reasons. There's a lot of things. And then even if a student commits a certain offense, let's say the kid really, really goes crazy and attacks a teacher. Then the IP team has to hold a meeting. It's called a manifestation determination meeting. We used to call it an A1 meeting. It's called a manifestation determination meeting, where they decide, is this student's behavior directly or indirectly a result of the disability? Classic example they use is, let's say a student who has suffered abuse in his or her past, is emotionally disturbed for whatever reason. A teacher maybe walks up innocently and puts his hand or her hand on the student's shoulder. The student goes crazy, starts attacking the teacher and whatnot. The team could probably reasonably conclude that student, that the behaviors shown there are directly related to the underlying emotional disturbance. It's not always so clear, though, especially when you're talking about chronically disruptive students. The kids who are dancing on the desks and yelling and cussing and screaming, and they refuse to do anything, and the schools are just up to up to hearing it. And they just say, "Oh my God, this kid is." If he or she is emotionally disturbed, it creates a problem. It's gotten to the point now where you generally cannot remove a student who is emotionally disturbed for chronically disruptive behaviors. It becomes a very, very difficult task. So now schools are very reluctant to identify students as emotionally disturbed because they can't discipline them like they would discipline another student. And there's a lot more involved in it. I'm going to do a whole other separate thing on special education and discipline. But for this case, emotionally disturbed students, and to some extent O8, ADHD students, have created a very unique situation for schools because they're very limited on how they can discipline those students, and it has become and is and will continue to become a real source of a lot of discussion on both sides of the issue. So hopefully that answers a little bit. If you have any questions about any of this, please send me a message, send me an email. Emotionally disturbed students, to some extent ADHD students in special education, it's a difficult task for schools because of their behaviors and because they're limited on what they can do. So it's not all special ed who has kind of gotten this reputation, but when you hear the term about the kids are special, it's emotionally disturbed students, and they used to identify them like crazy. Not so much anymore. And it's a real issue that education has continued to struggle with over the past couple of decades. Anyway, hope that helps. Have a great day.